Welcome to Crosscut. In today's episode, we're going to try to make a wood sign. Two helpful books that I have found are Making Wood Signs and The Router Handbook by Patrick Spielman. Start, I've sketched out a couple of the signs that I have in mind, starting with the very simple, moving on to a couple of trees, and down here I've darkened the background to accent the road and the trees with a script typewriting. But the one I'm fondest of and the one I've chosen to work with is this one here. It's a combination of different types of lettering, and hopefully I can get in here and get some kind of a nice little sketch of the house itself. This sign is from my friends Daryl and Patty Messner's house. They've got an 800-foot driveway, and I think this sign would look great right at the foot of it. Since I've never made a wood sign, and I had to refer to several of the books, the tools that I plan to use, outside of the basic carpenter's tools, will be a router, and I've got a 1.5-horse Sears Craftsman router. It's got plenty of power. I've got various router bits, most of which are carbide tipped. They're a little more expensive, but they will last longer. I've got a couple of straight wood chisels and a utility knife. You'd be surprised how much wood you can carve out just using a utility knife. What we have to do is we have to sketch out our sign on a piece of paper, and then we will transfer it in full size on a scrap piece of plywood. We have a little piece of sheetrock which I'm using as a scrap, and I've drawn out my full-scaled wood sign. I've cut out cardboard letters, and it just gives me an idea of the size and shape for the measuring when I go order my lumber. This is going to be a rustic sign. I'm choosing white pine, which is 2x8s, and they're right from the lumber mill, measuring exactly 2 inches wide by 8 inches. I bought 12-foot lengths, and I cut them down into approximately 3-foot lengths. Since they were stored outdoors at the lumber yard, I've got them drying with 2x4s, little blocks in between, and they're stickered right in front of a fan, right near the wood stove. They've been drying like this for a little bit over 24 hours. Alright, as I said, we're using 2x8s, which are from the sawmill, and I bought two 12-foot pieces, which I've cut down approximately 36 inches each. And the reason that I bought two 12-foot pieces was that I can use 8 of them. And what we'll try to do is get nice, clear pieces. If I just use one 12-foot piece, chances are I'd end up with knots right in the middle of the work, and if that's where the layout lines are for the letters, it will be very difficult to router. We're going to use the bite side. Most of these you can see are darker on the back side, and the knots don't come all the way through to the front. We're going to edge join these. We're going to need a doweling jig, some wood dowels, and we're going to use some special glue. Pat Spielman says that he doesn't like the Resorcinol glue. It's the only one I could find. He says it's expensive, and it is. It's around $17 just for this double can. It's a powdered catalyst which is mixed with a liquid resin. It is completely waterproof, withstands outdoor temperatures, and it can actually even be boiled. And as Pat Spielman points out, I don't know how many people are going to soak their signs in boiling water, but it will hold up on outside temperatures and it will stand the rain, which is what we want for this sign. We're going to edge join them with the dowels, and hopefully this glue is going to work. Where I route out the letters will be nice and clean. As you can see, I've drawn a triangle in pencil. This will show exactly which way the board should be put together when they're edge glued. Alright, I've laid out the board. Here's the triangle, very top of it. So this will be the top board, and this will be the second. The lettering should start through here, which is relatively clean. First thing we're going to need to do is we're going to decide where the dowels will be. Now, since they join this way, we'll bring them both up, put them together. Now, it doesn't make any difference where these triangles really are. We just want to make sure that these are straight. What we'll do is, starting in from the end, we'll square up a line, drawing through both pieces of wood. Go back to the other end, Now, we'll be cutting off of this end, so we don't want to go too far. We'll try one here, and we'll put one more in the smaller square right about there. Now these dowels don't add strength. The wood joint itself will be very strong from the glue. It'll actually be stronger than the wood. These dowels will only keep the wood. Some of the lengths may be a little bit cupped. And what the dowels will do, when the dowel is in place, it'll just make sure that the pieces line up and it's nice and smooth when we go to router. Alright, I've got my doweling jig in place, lined up on my center line. I have it set at a 5/16 hole because that's the size of the dowels that we'll be using. I have pre-measured the drill bit and set a piece of tape here so I know exactly when to stop drilling through it. Then all I have to do is move on to the next line, get it all lined up, tight, and continue. Okay, I've drilled all four right on the line. Now I'm ready to start on the second board. What we do is, we know that they're going to join this way. We've got our lines on the top. What I have to do is turn this piece around so that the top of the dowel drill is always on the top of the workpiece. I've taken some time to center these as close as possible, but I don't think you can ever really get them absolutely perfect. By reversing the board, we'll ensure that the holes match up perfectly. And again, we'll drill right through the line. Alright, I finished drilling all of the dowel holes on all four pieces. One thing to remember is, on the two ends, we only have 4. But on the two middle pieces, there will be 4 holes on either side. So you'll actually have 8 dowels on each of the insides, 4 dowels on the top and bottom. What I have here is just a test scrap of 2 pieces. Now you can see, when they put together and doweled, they'll be pretty close, but there'll always be an edge, and there'll be a dark line. The router might catch as we're working on this edge. So what we're going to do is we're going to chamfer the edges slightly, so that when they butt together, we'll have a little V joint there. It'll emphasize the fact that these are edge glued together. It is a rustic sign. What I've done, since I don't have a ball bearing chamfer bit, I've taken a V bit and I've screwed a straight edge onto the bottom of the router base. That'll allow me to go along the edge of the work and put a V on it. One more time. Okay, we can sand that up a little bit. You want to take a close look? Here you can get a good close look at how that fence works. I just came down slowly, plunging the router bit right into the fence. See what our V looks like. Try to get down a little bit closer, and there you can see the joint. What will happen is we can now glide our router right across the surface, and it won't get caught on either. Okay, I've got all of them together now. You'll notice that the top and the very bottom have not been chamfered. After we cut out our sign with the saber saw, when it's finished, we'll probably router all the way around the edges. Well, we're ready for gluing, and then we'll see whether our dowel holes are properly aligned. Alright, I've mixed the resource. Well, I've brushed on the glue on both edges. Now I'm ready to drive the dowels. There's no need to put glue on the dowels or in the dowel holes. The strength will come from the glue. The dowels are only to align the boards to make sure that they're not cupped. I'm putting 2 end ones on what will be the bottom piece. And in the center of the board will be the third board, and hopefully, when we piece them together, it'll fit. Okay, we'll get a rag and we'll clean up all of the excess. Alright, with a wet rag, I've wiped down the center line. The glue will squeeze out again later after we clamp it. I'm not concerned too much with this stain here because we're going to router out most of this area. If need be, I could sand it out, it'd be no problem. I could even rub it down a little harder. Now what we have to do is put the top two pieces together and then join these to the top two pieces. Well, let's see if the final two pieces go together. Well, now it's ready to be glued. Okay, got my pipe clamps on here. I'm going to give them a little bit of tightening. Just a little bit. Get the glue to start squeezing out. Let it sit like this, just for a second or two. We'll release the pressure all the way back up. And then we'll tighten them again. This will be the final tightening. You don't want to tighten them too much, just enough to where the glue just starts to come out. Now, with our water, we'll work on the lines, making sure we get all the glue out of the lines. Now we'll store our wood back in the room where the fireplace is. I told you it's hot. Boy, it's hot. At about 80 degrees, this should dry for 6 or 7 hours. We're going to leave this overnight and we'll keep stoking the fire. Alright, it's been about 30 hours since our wood has been drying. What we're going to do today is we're going to try to sketch out our sign so that we can cut it with the saber saw. What we'll need is a piece of cardboard which is roughly a little longer than the middle of the sign to one end. I don't know if you can see it, but the sign is slightly curved, starting at a rounded shape, coming down, coming up towards the end. That's the kind of corner we're going to get. By cutting half, we can reverse it and trace the other side to ensure that both corners are curved the same way. You'll need a sharp razor knife. You'll need a good straight edge. And since we won't be using power tools, you'll need a cold beer. Most of this takes a lot of thought and planning. Alright, what I've done is I've taken a piece of cardboard and starting from the middle and working to the right side as you face the sign, I've traced a black line. This will be the middle. Going across, it'll sweep up to the right corner. I've just sketched this roughly freehand. If you'd like, you can use some kind of round objects. It really doesn't have to be that perfect. You don't have to be an artist to make this kind of a design in any colonial furniture, particularly if you're going to router the edges later on. Using a router will completely disguise any kind of mistakes. The only thing we have to do now is take a razor and carefully cut all the way through the line. It's probably better to take your time and make several shallow cuts. And again, don't worry about following your line too closely. Once this is put onto a large sign, no one's going to know the difference, and no one would ever see your line anyway. I think this last cut should just about do it. Okay, that should be fine. So what we have here is the top half of the sign. When we reverse it, and you'll have the other side. This can be traced now onto our full work surface. For the bottom piece, this large rounded surface, we'll be doing the same thing. What we need is another larger piece of cardboard, a little bit wider, and we'll trace this rounded shape, again, only to the half point. Perhaps the most important part of designing your sign is picking the shape on your rough draft. I didn't want a shape that was exactly round. So what I've done is I've taken my wide cardboard, I've traced a line, and just roughly with the knife, I'll try to follow an arc. The most important part is the fact that the bottom of the sign, since it will be flipped over, this side should come out fairly straight. If it's not, you can always fix it up on the sign with pencil when you're finished. If this sign should come up a little bit, when you turn it over, you'll end up with a heart-shaped little shape in the middle, or if you come down, you'll end up with a bubble shape on the bottom. It may be a design that you want in your sign. My particular sign, I would like to have a round bottom. So hopefully, when we have this on the bottom and we turn it over, we've got our top piece and we're ready to put it to work right on the board. Okay, I've got my cardboard letters on the board here. You get a good look at it. As you can see, I couldn't get all of these pieces not having a radial arm saw. These pieces of wood in 12-foot lengths were really difficult, even for Anita and I to try to cut them. And they weren't exactly 12 feet. They came from the lumber mill. What I did was I cross-cut them the best I could. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line to the widest part of the board. It'll be a good square line up either end. And we'll cut that off before we start our routing procedure. Now what we have to do, we have our bottom piece, which we'll lay in place somewhere from the middle. That'll determine exactly where we want our bottom. Our top piece will be the same way. Starting from the very top at the edge, we line it up on our pencil line. And then we trace it out. Again, don't worry about how perfect your pencil line is. We turn this over. We go back to our edge. Since we're using 35 inches, the 17.5 line should come out pretty close. Starting at the top, just trace it out on the other side. I'm going to cut this with a saber saw. This is 2 inches thick. The chances of you cutting it perfectly are pretty slim anyway. And if you make any mistakes, it can be sanded down with a belt sander. The bottom of the sign, we'll have to plan exactly how far down we want to come. We have our letters on this particular sign. What I want to do is the letters are going to be up towards the top. This sign is for Patty and Darrell Messner with their new house. So what I'll try to do is I'll have a little bit of a sketch of their house over in the corner here. That'll be placed here. And a little road design coming down. So the bottom of the sign will actually be unrouted. Around the sides of the road will be routed down to a pretty good depth. All right, what I've done, I've darkened in my lines so you can see them. At the bottom here, before tracing out my round circular shape, I drew a parallel line using the square all the way across the center. So that I can lay it down this way, draw my line, turn it over, find the parallel line. Starting from there, and my parallel line up the side, I line these two square edges up, and then trace it. So I end up with a pretty close semicircular shape down the end. The next thing I have to do, just take a good circular saw, and cut off these two edges. That'll give me some good square edges to work when I router out the letters. This shape up the top, I came right up to the top here. This can be belt sanded smooth. Down at the bottom, I would like to make this cut with the saber saw in one continuous motion. And for that reason, I've left about 1/4 inch of the board down the bottom. But when I bought the lumber, I was looking for around a 31-inch width on the sign. And what I ended up with was exactly 8-inch pieces. So I've got 32 inches. I'll be a little longer on the sign, but here I can just trim off a little bit, come right through with the saw. It just works a little bit smoother. If you'll notice here, right around the edges, I have what will probably be 1 inch to 1 1/8 of a border. Now I could draw using a pencil line, and I could mark 1 inch or 1 1/8 all the way around, but I'm not going to. What I hope to do later on is to hook up a jig on my router and route an edge all the way around, and hopefully it'll be exactly 1 inch or 1 1/8, whichever side we decide on. I've also roughly penciled in my road. I haven't really detailed the house, and I haven't outlined it because I want to get a better look at Daryl's house so I can make a good sketch. This cardboard here is just roughly the size that I want, and I will sketch it in more detail later when I prepare to chisel it out. Page 71 of Pat Spielman's book, he shows the use of a double-edged T-square, which allows the router to glide right along the pieces of wood. In the lower photo, you can see him using the router. It has a parallel piece on the top and the bottom, and I'll show you what I've done in a moment. What Pat Spielman used is 2 pieces of wood with one edge on the top and one on the bottom, which allows it to square up flush. Then you would place the router between the 2 pieces of wood. I've taken this a little bit further. What I did is I took 2 pieces of pine, and using a 1/4 inch rabbiting bit, I rabbited out on either side, and then I spaced it exactly the width of my router. What this allows me to do is guide the router over, no matter what type of surface. Later on, when I'm routing out the background, it's going to be extremely important. This way I can dig a big hole. We'll start from this side. And as you can see, I've taken my router bit and I've gone right through the bottom. This allows me to line my work up square at the bottom and then start right through. Here's vertically, and we'll turn the square around and we'll router all of the horizontal straight lines. The A's, the E's, the U, the B, and the O are going to be very difficult to router out. It's going to have to be done completely freehand. The W, I'm probably going to have to cut completely with a chisel. Well, I tried to show the routing process. It's very difficult to do it because I keep getting in the way. But what you can see here is this is the line. This is actually where the router bit travels. I lined this up, and I made this cut here. I made a second and a third cut. These round cuts will all have to be done freehand. This straight cut here will go along to all of the horizontal cuts. So what I have to do is all the vertical cuts of the letters, and then we'll get to the round parts later on. We won't be able to use this jig, so we'll have to raise the bit and match this depth. Well, as you can see, I've done all of my horizontal cuts and all of the vertical cuts. Now's the moment of truth, when we try to do all of these freehand round cuts. In order to get started, the first thing we had to do was loosen up our bit. We sink it into the hole here. We make sure that it's exactly the same depth as it was when we had our guide. And now we're just about ready to get started. Well, I'm pretty happy with the results so far. We can zoom in here a little bit and we can see what the letters look like. I've used my single fluted router bit for most of the letters, and I really did a lot more than I expected. I expected to do a lot more chiseling. The letter W needed some chiseling. Around the bottom of the B, the top of the R, and the top and bottom of the A all required some work. What I've used is a 3/4 inch carpenter's chisel, a 3/8 inch chisel, and a utility knife, which is a very useful tool when carving. What we have to do now is we have to use that single fluted router bit to make our 1.5 inch border. We may cut it down a little shorter, somewhere around an inch or so, and then we will use a double fluted 1/2 inch router bit, which will be flat bottomed also, to take away all the excess around the letters. Well, I've just cut off the top end using the saber saw, and it wasn't too bad a cut. This is a pretty good sized saber saw, but I was really having some trouble. What I'm going to try to do on the bottom now is I'm going to try using my Sawzall. Well, I went back to the saber saw. I tried the Sawzall with a brand new blade. Didn't help me too much. I went through 3 blades with the saber saw. I think with this angle you can get a little better look at the lettering. And our corner and top. And around to the bottom. You can see it's still a little rough edged here. We'll just take the belt sander and smooth it right down. What we're going to have to do now is we're going to have to put our border, and eventually we'll probably route all the way around the edges, give it a nice clean look. Alright, what I've done now is I've sketched in my house pretty much the way I want it, and the road. And I'm trying for my border. What I've gone for is 1.25 inches. I've sketched straight edge down, and then measuring in, I sketched approximately where I wanted, 1.25 inches. I was going to try to make some kind of a jig to put the router on, but since the surface is not that straight, and I had such good luck using the straight router bit, I'm going to try to do this freehand, and I'll probably go across the top and do the same thing. As far as measuring it, what I've done is I started with my original piece of cardboard, which I used to do the saber saw cut. I measured in 1.25 inches. I cut this off, and then I used it as a guide here, flipped it over. I've got a center line down for a square. I still have the horizontal line that I used from the beginning. We have this as a square. Match up the horizontal line with the vertical line, trace it in, and I've got a pretty good 1.25 inch semicircle. It should match pretty much to the bottom. I'll belt sand it out, and from a distance it won't make too much of a difference. I'm going to have to do the same thing here. I'll take the old cardboard and I'll measure it out so I can get this kind of a groove up at the top. Alright, I have the top piece. What I've done is I put it back in place using a straight edge. I measured in 1.25 inches all the way around, and then I penciled in a line. What I'll have to do now is just cut along the line with the scissors. Trying to stay as carefully as I can to the line. We'll put it back in place, right from the corner. Trace it to the middle. Start at the other corner. Put it in place. And we've got a pretty good corner. The only thing we'll have to do is cut out the 2 corners with the chisel. Everything else can be done with the router bit. All right, now we're ready to turn it around and see what we can do on the top. All right, it takes care of the top and the bottom. I know that my sides now are square, because we cut them pretty square with the circular saw. What I'll do is I'll rig up just a straight edge, and we'll use the router for 2 good straight lines, connecting the top and the bottom. We're going to still have to route out this corner so that we have a good square edge. And then we'll go to a chisel. Alright, what I've done here now is I've routed out the sides. Using a straight edge on either side, I've come down. We can chisel out the top if we want to. The other thing I've done is I've outlined where my road is going to be, and I outlined the top of the house. We'll fill in the house towards the last. Now we can take our 1/2-inch bit and we can clean out all of this area around the house, around either side of the road. Well, you get the idea. This is the time-consuming part. It's a little bit boring, but you got to be very careful that you don't get too close to the letters, or you'll end up taking something off that took a lot of time to put on in the first place. One important thing that we'll have to do is, as we're going over these letters, as the router starts to get into more open space, it can tip. You have to be careful to stay on the letters. If for some reason we get into a wide open space where the router won't make it, we'll use some kind of a jig. The homemade router jig, which just replaces the front of this. We unscrew the original plate, we screw this on, and it'll give us a wider base to glide over the letters. If that's not wide enough, what we can do is we can go back to our original guide. You lay this flat from the top or from the side. We'll have to reset the router bit to a deeper depth and then glide across the top this way. I think most of the sign I'm going to be able to hold it freehand. At least I hope so. A couple hours each night, it's starting to take a little bit of shape. Remember last night, we were using the router. I had the dust shield on my face. and the router dust was just flying all over the place. What I did today is I took the router and I taped in the vacuum hose on my shop vac. And I've been using it, it's been working pretty well. If you noticed yesterday, this side here, which is normally covered with a plastic shield, I usually remove this. It always gets coated with sawdust and you just can't see. What I'm going to try now is with the shop vac, some of the dust still comes spitting out at me. I'm going to try putting this thing back in. And we'll see. If it stays clear, all the dust that's cut up is going to be sucked back into the shop vac. And very little of it's going to end up on a work surface. We'll see how it works. Decided it was better to eat a little bit of dust. That plastic shield, no matter how clean it was, it's still not quite as good. This router has a bulb inside that burned out within the first few days after buying the router. I don't know if the bulb would really help that much, but with that plastic screen out and the vacuum hooked up, none of the dust gets kicked out of the back. It all gets sucked down into the vacuum. That was a big help. I gotta have me a little beer here. We finished down the bottom. Now the only thing we have to do is clean out the whole top. And from there, it's just going to be a lot of dust. Well, we finished routering. Now we'll see what happens. Well, with all the sawdust, I left one little piece here that I have to chew out. We'll do that. Now we're getting ready. We'll do a little bit more details. We got to work on the house. Maybe we'll try to put a couple of trees behind here, a couple of little pine trees. Well, as you can see, I've routed around the edges. And I've gotten a lot of details done on the inside. Moving towards the house here. A little tough to get in here, make it sharp. Well, what I did was I wanted to use a wood burner. Since I don't have one, I used a wire brad wired around the front of a soldering iron. And I was able to get some pretty good details here. I chiseled around the straight edges of the road, just giving it a little bit of a smoother look. I've chiseled in the top of the trees, and we're starting to work away on the background, trying to get rid of all the tool marks left over from the round router bit. But overall, I say it's coming along pretty well. We're going to put it in front of the wood stove now and let it dry a little more. It's about 80 degrees here, right near the wood stove. Right now I'm standing directly behind it. I've got the sign propped up against the chair, and I've got the fan here blowing off the side of the wood stove directly at the sign. We'll leave it here overnight. We'll stoke the fire up. I think it's going to be drying it out a little bit better than it has been. I've noticed a lot of moisture coming out as I've gotten into the deep parts here, as you can see around the trees. I've cut down pretty deep into the wood, and I can see moisture coming out at that point, so we're going to let it dry out. Hi, I'm Bob Vila with Time Life Books. On page 38, I'll show you how to professionally install sheetrock at a fraction of the cost of hiring outside help. Here I penciled out my line showing the center of the stud, and I'm driving. Oh, well, Norm can finish this up later. In kitchens and baths, you'll find out how to change existing plumbing fixtures and replace them with contemporary design. Decks and add-ons, you'll build the confidence to tackle your own outdoor projects, which will provide your family members with countless hours of fun. Ah! On page 96, you'll get detailed instructions on how to replace the shingles on your roof. No! And if you order now, you'll get a complete supply of 1 year's Band-Aids and assorted medical supplies. Well, as you can see, you can learn everything to take care of your house from our new book series. I hope you order the books. For now, I'm Bob Vila. Well, as you can see, this is the finished product. A lot of work's gone into it since the last time we've been on tape. First thing we did was we used a good wood preservative and we treated the wood coat after coat until it just wouldn't take anymore. Then I used a dark wood stain and a light stain for the house, the trim, and just one coat here. I'm hoping that this part here, the road, will turn a nice silver gray after a couple of years. The letters were first primed with a good wood saver prime and then gold leaf. The green enamel we used for the trees in the background. The reason that we didn't use any kind of a varathane on here is that the finish from varathane will peel. Here's a sign I made a few years ago, and after only about 6 months, you can see the varathane just peels off like plastic. It's not the rain that does it, or the water, it's actually the sun. In the areas here that are shielded from the sun, the varathane seems to hold up. But in the long run, this surface, although it doesn't have the good appearance that the urethane has, will stay dark, and hopefully, with 3 coats on here, it'll last about 10 years. Crosscut is brought to you in part by Steel Chainsaws. Steel. It's Jason's choice. Should you accept any less?